Welcome to Explore, Explain. This is a long-form video and podcast series sharing conversations with data visualization designers and developers from around the world. Each episode explores the detailed hidden thinking behind a single project or a series of related works to explain the what, the why, and the how of the design process. So let's jump in to today's episode with your host, Andy Kirk.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Explore, Explain. And in today's show, I'm delighted to welcome Chaz Hutton, a very special guest from a very special world that is perhaps a bit of a distance from or adjacent to data viz. Chaz, it's wonderful to meet you, mate. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. Maybe for the benefit of the viewers and listeners, you can do a better job of introducing yourself than I can.
I've had a few weeks to work out what I was going to say for this introduction. I just realised I never had put down something that sort of I was happy with. But generally, I draw comics and cartoons. It's sort of somewhere between a web cartoon and a cartoonist. And yeah, they started on an Instagram nearly 10 years ago. The Instagram sort of got some attention, and then off the back of that, I ended up doing a book and sort of never looked back and have kept doing that ever since. And so, yeah, now predominantly just, create comics and cartoons and write a bit of stuff here and there. And general funny nonsense is the aim of the game.
But it's all, I mean, and the reason why I've been so keen to get you on this series is because at the heart of all this stuff is still communication. It's still thinking about the efficiency and the brevity of language and of how you communicate things in a visual portrayal. Now that the intent or the material might be different to what we typically use in data viz, but there are lots of commonalities, and I want to sort of explore those today. We've got 5 of your works that are a nice sort of, I guess, a diverse repertoire of different pieces, different styles, different kind of formats to look at, and just sort of draw out of those what we in the data viz world can sort of learn from the stuff that you do. But I guess just a kind of a soft opener would be, you mentioned there sort of about 10 years has been the sort of time you've been doing this stuff. What was what was your background before that? I mean, were you always a kid doodling and doing cartoons and comics, or was it something that was in the background and you were a kind of mathematical protege or something? I don't know.
I wish. No, I was in architecture. So I studied architecture and then was working in architecture for a number of years. And so, so there's always been a drawing aspect to things. And yeah, I did a lot of art at school and I've sort of doodled here and there. Nothing to the extent that I do now, where it sort of consumes my entire life. But so there's always been an
artistic leaning, perhaps.
An artistic thing there. The comics themselves started when I was working in an architecture firm, and I wasn't a great architect. I had a sort of it was the details that I didn't love, and they love details. So, I'd spend a lot of time just drawing little things on Post-it notes in the office and sending them, texting them to friends and stuff. And eventually that turned into what I draw now. And architecture quickly fell by the wayside.
Right. So what was the, I guess the transition point? What was the moment at which you thought, actually, this could be the thing that I focus on as a career?
I think when the advance for the book deal went into my bank account.
Right, okay.
I was like, guess. Oh, now I can afford to sort of, buy myself a few months and see if this can work. It's always scary with those kind of talking about those like success stories or whatever, where people make it sound so easy. It's like, absolutely not. There's no way I would have sort of made the jump from architecture to drawing stick figures for a living if I didn't have sort of some kind of safety net there.
Some kind of ramp. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the book deal was a wonderful thing, and it did allow me to sort of go out and spend some time doing it. And that was 10 years ago.
And do you think you always had the, I don't know, like almost like the independent spirit to go and do things alone as a freelancer, as an independent worker, rather than working for an organization as such?
I mean, I miss working in office
Mm.
because a lot of the material that I
I
had
was about to say that
early on
that's
was
such
office stuff.
a source for your
Yeah, and so
material.
10 years down the track of sort of working in, you know, like co-working spaces at the best, but most of the time working at home or at a coffee shop or something,
Yeah,
you start to like I've completely lost touch with what it's sort of, what
kind of
office life is
community
like.
sort of thing. Yeah,
And like, thank God for lockdown, because then I was like, oh, everyone's working from home. All right, I can talk about this. Um, but yeah. It's I do like working for myself. I mean, it is one of those things where every day is a potential work day and every
yeah.
potential day off. So you do need to have some sort of structure, which I find hard
There's a
to.
fine line between those two worlds, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if it's a beautiful day and the weather's not looking good for the weekend, you're like, I think I'll just move the weekend forward.
yeah. But
And
you've
then,
got
of
to
course,
go back to do the work
ends
at the
up and you're like,
weekend.
well, I'll have the weekend as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I think I have worked for big organizations in the past, but I do think that my sensibility was probably leaning more towards being an independent sort of sole
Yeah.
forager in the world. But yeah, I do miss that sense of a like a kind of collegial group of people that you work with, and I suppose to a degree, but not even remotely close to social media and the kind of platforms that we can share. We create that a little bit, but
Yeah.
yeah, you miss that kind of face-to-face contact, I guess.
Absolutely.
Now, just kind of reducing things to quite simplistic perspectives, but certainly from those of us and outside of your world, what would you sort of see as the difference between or the distinction between cartoons and illustrations and comics? Is there a meaningful difference? Because we in the data viz world are always wrapping ourselves up in the complexities of what is an infographic or an interactive or a
Yeah.
dashboard or a story. Do you have that same, do you have clarity of distinction? I mean, is it something about the intent of humor distinguishes a cartoon from an illustration? How do you see this?
I always said it early on where um, um what I do is sort of either sort of cartooning or illustration or comics or something, and but if I ever spoke if I ever spoke to someone who was one of those things, I'd be embarrassed to sort of admit. I'd say that, I'm like
I'm one of
sort
you.
of 30% of each,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
not nearly enough of one to sort of lay claim to any single one. Because what I do is illustration, but then I see, really good illustrators, and I'm like, oh God, I can't do that. And then at the same time, cartoonists. There's some incredible cartoonists, and I've seen them work in real time, and it's sort of, a few flicks of the pen, and you've got like a
yeah,
caricature there. You're like, oh wow. Whereas if I have to do any of that sort of stuff, I'm drawing stick figures with two dots for eyes. So when it comes to calling myself a cartoonist, that's fraught as well. But generally, I think it's just a little bit of everything. And
mm,
and with data viz as well, it's sort of, you know, I was drawing a lot of graphs and charts and to as jokes, especially early on. And so that comes into it a bit as well, sort of representing data in sort of
yeah,
funny ways,
yeah, of course. But I think the thing that's always fascinating about cartoons, especially, is that sense of it's trying to do so much. Typically in a small space, typically in a single frame, typically
Yeah.
with a brevity of marks and sort of visual strokes, as you mentioned there. But it's got to convey some plot, some setting, some context, and be funny.
Yeah.
Usually without that many words. Now
Yeah.
I know that language and words play an important part in a lot of your work, but I can imagine that even when you have to use a word to label something or to caption something, you're looking for as short as number of words as possible. Is that fair?
Well, I think what's the script writing thing, like show, don't tell.
Yeah,
And I think that sort of applies to cartoons as well and comics because yeah, if you have to label something, like write down this a thing, you're like, you've kind of failed a bit, I think, if
yeah,
you represent it graphically. And like I've done it before, and sort of when there's no other way around it, sometimes you have to do it, sure, but generally you try to avoid it, I think. Um, I was going to say the other thing that I like is if you can do a comic that has no words whatsoever,
Mm.
that to me is sort of
Got the
the
purist.
happens sometimes where I'll write it out. I'm like, okay, this person says this and this person says that, blah, blah, blah. And you got a thing going on.
Yeah,
You start reworking it and you go, oh, hold on a second. This makes perfect sense without any speech bubbles.
yeah,
Suddenly you've got like a really wonderful like cartoon that
yeah.
everyone understands. It's already translated into every
And
language.
then it's language agnostic as well, so you've got a wider audience who can
Yeah,
understand it
yeah,
and grasp
exactly.
it, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah, and I think that's interesting as a sort of tension that perhaps is perhaps a little bit different in pure data viz, which is I don't necessarily think that universally, of course, there are context specific moments, but universally, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if you have to explain a data viz in terms of how to read it, what it's saying, what it's showing, because sometimes things are unfamiliar and a reader needs that assistance to kind of get there. I think it's the opposite with humor and with jokes. You don't want to have to
Yeah.
explain a joke, but a particular nuance of all this and something that I really admire in what you do on Blue Sky, especially, is you include alt text with
Yeah.
the images, which is good practice anyway. But how do you how do you find that task of having to articulate in words something that you've tried to not have to typically use words to express?
I really like it because and I really should do it. I really should do alt text for Instagram more. But I think I do it on Blue Sky because it's just like it's the done thing there, and
Mm,
and we should everyone should do it. And yeah,
yeah.
as a do it for Instagram. But I really like it because it does allow you to add in more jokes in a way.
Right. Okay.
Because if you're just obviously if you like, is it E.B. White? I think uh, dissecting humor is like dissecting a frog. You work out why it works, but it'll die in the process. The joke, you know.
Right.
So I yeah, the when you write it down, obviously it sort of loses a lot of the humor and stuff. But
Mm,
so at the same time, the way you write it is completely different to the way it's sort of shown, and you can add in
yeah.
comments. And like I've had I've had alt texts where I've added in commentary on my own drawing, and
Right.
it's like, oh, we've got to draw this, we're drawing that, and I haven't drawn that very well, but work with me, and you know,
Well, that's what I liked about when I read a few of the alt texts of your works. I almost liked the it's like the DVD commentary in the old days.
yeah, yeah,
You get a
yeah,
new insight,
absolutely, yeah,
a new
that's
way of looking
exactly
at
what
it.
I'm going for, yeah.
Yeah. Um,
I did ones for I've been putting up an old series I did which is like a drawing of a whale and just
mm,
drawing this whale in different
that's right.
different outfits on and different like doing a Salvador Dali whale and it's kind of melting like one of his
Melting. Yeah.
and so I started putting the alt text in that and then just putting in sort of informative stuff about each sort of different style of whale I was doing. And that started to get like quite a few like retweets, not retweets, whatever it is on Blue Sky. But with people just kind of, oh, this is really interesting and
Yeah.
kind of fun, and like like and advising people to read the alt text, which is kind of
Yeah.
nice. So,
No, it's a really I think it's kind of similar, I suppose, in the way that once again, as a database person, if you create a visual, forcing yourself to then explain it to someone verbally, pointing things out is another way to say, first of all, do you understand what you've done? Do you understand what you've made and why?
yeah,
And is it showing you? Is it showing the things that you think it's showing? Otherwise, it's probably not the right thing. I think another just again in the sort of setting the scene for this subject and its relationship with or differences to data viz. I think another distinction possibly, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, but it feels to me that whereas I think the absolute origin of a data viz that's worthwhile doing is curiosity. You're wanting to know something, or you're wanting others to know something, and you're inheriting their curiosity.
yeah,
And then you get the data, then you do the thing, then you show the thing. Would it be fair to say that the absolute seed of a cartoon is perhaps more observation and how
yeah,
you sort of perceive the world, and going back to the idea that you've lost the office and the surrounding
yeah.
dynamics, you lose a source of observations.
I think, well, yeah, you're sort of you're tapping in like one of your resources to a degree is like people's own experience, and
Mm,
most experiences aren't that unique, which is great for
Yeah.
making jokes and cartooning and stuff. And so you can you can sort of draw something that is sort of this universal truth,
Mm,
which in of itself isn't that funny, but provided everyone can relate to it, then you can
yeah.
make a joke out of it that people understand. And so you don't have to explain much because people already have that experience themselves.
Yes, of course.
And like something as mundane as sort of like walking around a supermarket and
Mm,
going down the same aisle 3 times, and the inefficiency of it all and all that sort of stuff. It's not inherently funny, by itself, but if you do a joke about that,
yeah.
people are like, "Oh my God, I do this as well."
Yeah. That sort of
And
relatability. Yeah.
yeah, you don't have to. You're not going and going. So when you walk around the supermarket,
Yeah.
like,
You all know supermarkets, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and the other thing I think's in kind of important in again these sort of senses of differences or commonalities with data viz is we've always got to think about an audience. Now, are you creating cartoons primarily for yourself that you would find funny and that you hope others, or are you envisioning a kind of persona of I want this to work for X, Y, and Z characteristic of person, or is that too much thinking? Is that overthinking something?
There's a great David Bowie interview where he's like, "Don't play to the gallery," and
Right.
like, it's. I think as soon as you start to do stuff that you think people will,
Mm,
it's it, you know it thins
divert it
everything
or
out.
something.
If you try to
Yeah.
please everyone, you have a very thin, sort of wide thing. Whereas like it's so much better to do something very specific and ideally something that you find funny. And then it's like a narrower crowd that it appeals to, but the sort of depth of meaning is much deeper.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I've always done stuff that I prefer, that I quite like, that I find funny.
Yeah.
It sounds very sort of like self-involved, but I've everything that I've done that I think is funny, like when it goes well, it's so much better.
Yeah, of course.
It doesn't always work. Like I do stuff that I think's hilarious, and I did a joke about a bag of sugar trying to get a ball out of a swimming pool for his dog, which is so surreal and doesn't make any sense, but I think it's hilarious. Anyway, it got very few likes, barely any comments, but I love
But you
it.
were happy.
Like, yeah, and it's like you don't want to have this, like, yeah, you've got to make it fun for yourself, and then people will come along. So yeah, that's to answer that
But I
question.
guess
It's
if there isn't a
definitely,
part of you in that you're enjoying the thing that you're making and you're having a giggle
yeah,
to yourself, then it probably just saps the energy for even doing it, the motivation for even doing it, really. And I think it's
trying
a
to
good
please everyone.
segue into the first piece that we're going to profile, which is a project. I think you've whether it's the official title or a titles, All the People, and this is
Yeah,
a big canvas or a big kind of collection of frames of individual people. And I think I'm looking at my notes, I think 182 people, figures that make up this full
yeah,
thing, sort of 13
I,
by 14 grid.
that's
Um,
it.
and this is, I mean, I'll let you describe it yourself, but this is just a bunch of individual scenes of people that um, depicts sort of statuses or contexts or actions. I suppose the first question is what's the sort of backstory to this? What made
This
you
this
do this?
definitely this explanation of it sounds makes it sound very surreal. But the background explains it quite well, I think. It started off as because when I draw a little stick figure, trying to evoke emotion out of what is essentially two circles, four lines, and two dots.
Mm,
And so I used to just sort of practice and do little studies for myself, like how do you have someone looking sad? How do you have someone looking despondent? How do you have
mm,
someone looking angry? These are all different, very particular feelings. And so I just started drawing them down and sort of trying to work out what I could do with a very minimal amount of information, I guess. And then I realized that they'd make a good poster. And so it was originally called Many Moods. And I
okay.
did that years and years ago. And it was a much smaller grid. It was, I think, sort of 7 or 8 people wide and, 10 deep. Or actually, much smaller even. Whatever. Anyway, did that. And then about a year and a half ago, I had an exhibition in Berlin, which is really lovely. And I was sort of just producing work for that. And I had this idea of doing just a big version of it. And I literally just went down to the art shop, found a 70 by 100 centimeter piece of paper and started drawing it by hand, which
Right.
was terrifying because you're drawing 182 little individual drawings. And if you make one mistake on one
Yeah.
of them,
It's over.
it's, yeah. I mean, you're not going to start again. You're going to try to fix it,
Style
but
it out. Yeah.
I didn't want to have to do it. So, yeah. And then, of course, as you're drawing, you sort of, I had to stop the page from smudging.
Yeah.
At one point, I was sort of lying across my kitchen table trying to get it all done. And got it done just in time. It was sort of halfway through it, I realized it was a terrible idea to hand draw the whole thing. But got it all drawn. And then obviously, after you've drawn maybe 20 or
Mm.
30, 40 even people, I was running out of moods and
Right.
things. And so ended up having to add in more things. So I'm like, man holding an umbrella, person who's stubbed his toe.
Yeah. Getting
And
really
so
specific. Yeah.
as you look through as you look down the drawing, they gradually get more and more sort of specific and fantastical and ridiculous, and and the idea. And then as I was drawing it, I thought, oh, you can add in sort of jokes here,
Yeah.
and so I had, one. I think there's one person going, oh, when you forget someone's name, and you sort of waving at someone,
Yeah.
and then the next person over is like when you realize someone's forgotten your name, or
That's it.
um,
The combinations emerge as you
there's
go
little
through.
combinations. Yeah,
And there's a
some
sword fight. Is there somewhere down the middle there? I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a fencer next to someone doing sort of warrior pose in yoga, which are very
Yeah.
kind of similar, body positions. And there's a person at the top. And it says possibly a star, and they're like, "I'm a star." And then down the bottom is
Oh, the
someone with
telescope.
yeah,
Yes.
going like looking like possibly looking at a star,
Right.
and
Brilliant.
sort of diagonally opposite each other. So yeah, there's a whole you can, and I've realized it's great to have at sort of if you've got a dinner party or just a house party or something going on, and you find three or four people standing around it, just sort of looking at all and pointing them out
Yeah.
to people because no one ever goes top to bottom like
No,
looking through one. You sort of it's like a Where's Wally or something. You
that's
kind of
right.
finding little things, and yeah, it's really
Yeah.
fun.
I think my favorite combinations, I think I noted down here. There's one where you've got not enough books and
Yep.
then too much sandwich, and it's almost the same thing, but it's side
Yeah, the
by
same
side.
shape.
And then there was the protest and the counter protest, which I
Yep.
greatly enjoyed. I can't even remember where the other ones are that I've written down, but yeah, I love it as a piece. And you talked there about the kind of almost like the simplicity of the figures and the anatomy that you've got here. How did you end up with that style or that choice of kind of minimal depiction of a body? And with that, therefore, do you find that constraint useful? So in an exercise like this, where you don't have perhaps a mouth or
Yeah.
the digits to work with, is it actually a helpful constraint to kind of encourage innovation and creativity?
Um, a part of me wishes I'd put
I was going
eyebrows
to
in.
say, right, okay.
I could have,
That's the
just with
one
a
thing
couple
you'd
of
add if you
eyebrows,
could.
couple of
Yeah.
eyebrows, I could have really made my life easier over the years. And when I do need to, a bit like, writing down what the thing is, when I do need to, I'll put in some eyebrows. I'm like, this person doesn't look surprised enough. I'm like, well, put the upside down U shapes. Um, but generally, for a start, I don't have to draw as much. That's
Yeah.
great. And I've got better over the years of sort of getting emotion out of very little.
Mm,
And so it sort of works
yeah.
now.
And of course,
But
you've got the liberation of bringing the props as well into each of the depictions as well. So that gives you that extra
yeah, yeah, that's true.
creative license. But I
Um,
guess the other thing that stands out as well, which is maybe it's a signature style, which is the black, white, occasionally grey, so for things like shadows or shading. And then there's usually a spot color, which is typically yellow. Now,
yep.
one of the things about yellow is yellow on white is a dreadful combination, but yellow on white with a outline or a stroke is beautiful. I love it as a color contrast. How did yellow become the thing? The kind of
Um,
primary spot color of choice.
Post-it notes.
Right,
So
okay.
yeah, when I first started drawing these comics and cartoons and stuff, I did them all on post-it notes. So if you scroll way down the Instagram, eventually it just becomes a sea of post-it notes. And so I draw my little comic on a post-it note and then take a photo of it and post it. Um, and God, it's horrific going back and having a look at sort of the difference in drawing style. Thank God I've improved in the last 10 years, but going back and looking at the old work, I kind of go, oh,
I think
that's
that's right. I think that's a good thing, though. I think we
terrible.
should be horrified by past work, otherwise you've
Yeah.
not moved on, right?
I, I mean, it was good enough for a book, which also horrifies me. Anyway, um, but yeah. So yeah, it started with post-it notes, and then eventually I realized I felt a bit constrained because I was using rectangular post-it notes, and Instagram was square back
All
then,
right, yeah.
and so I was only using kind of 50% of the middle of the image, and it was sort of, maybe things would be different now if they brought in the
The sort
you
of
know,
tall.
the portrait option.
Mm,
But
yeah,
over the years have shifted to sort of drawing on an iPad and a bit more freedom. So now the post-it notes are gone, but I've sort of kept that yellow
yeah,
high. I mean, yellow or orange. It's usually an orangey yellow rather than a green yellow.
yeah,
And I think to exactly what you're saying, I really just like the highlight of it.
yeah.
It's sort of, especially if, yeah, you've got a white background and then a highlight. Yeah,
But obviously, in other pieces that we'll see shortly, is there are moments when a different color screams out for the need for it. Like a
yeah.
red might be just so
Mm.
intrinsically linked to a subject that you can't get away with the kind of orange yellow to in that case. But
I think also there's one other thing I just wanted to add.
mm,
It's also that, those old school sort of like children's books or
penguin books.
illustrated books from the 60s,
Yeah,
50s, 60s, and they only had enough budget for one color. And it's like,
yeah,
they're really great. I love them. And
yeah,
there's a bit of that to it as well. So
yeah.
I did work for a client recently and had suggested, like, what if we just did this all in one color and kept it really simple? And
Mm.
they were like, yeah, great. It's like, yes.
And I do think again from a Davis perspective, I think there is something quite useful about maybe self-imposing a certain restriction in your color palette until you need
Yeah.
to break it.
Yeah.
Because color has got such a powerful role to play, either as something that's associated with data or something that is decorative. And I think if you go too wild,
Yeah.
it might appeal on one level, but then the confusion emerges when you try to work out what color stands for what. But no, I think it's a lovely I think it's a lovely combination. And it takes us on to the next piece, which is another well-known piece of yours, which is I think you term it the jigsaw decisions piece. And
Yeah.
for those who can't see this, this is basically like a simplistic jigsaw puzzle, and it's got the words I'm. What I'll do, I'll say it in terms of one version of this. So let's imagine it's
Okay.
I'm now going to do that thing I've got to do, then I can have fun. But you've taken out one jigsaw piece and another jigsaw piece where the now can become not,
Hmm.
and the when can become then, and it's your choice whether you put the T or the W. But you've only got one of each. Where did this come from?
I don't know.
It
Because
just happened.
I've recently been trying to make another one, and it's
Right.
hard. It's really hard.
Yeah. There's a lot of things at play.
Yeah, it's sort of, finding words and this and that. But I remember playing around with the idea. I don't know where the jigsaw idea came from, but I knew, or maybe the wordplay came in first, and then what's a way to sort of
Yes,
make
yeah.
it fun to move
Yeah.
is around, and a jigsaw works. And I originally drew it just like I drew the jigsaw
Yeah.
illustrated. And it wasn't until the exhibition that I mentioned earlier where I thought, oh, I might be able to actually literally make this.
Yeah.
And so I ordered a blank jigsaw puzzle
Oh, okay, right.
paint and started to put it together. And it's become a really popular piece that I sell,
Well,
which
I'll tell
is
you why it's so relatable again, going back to that word. I can't remember the exact words, but my mum sent me a WhatsApp message over Christmas, and she mistyped not instead of now, and didn't correct it, and it changed from a very sort of, a very sort of nice message to we're not going to do that, and it's like, whoa, what's wrong
Yeah,
with what's wrong with you, mum? What's this angry state you've found yourself in?
I think
And then
I
it was
think
suddenly corrected.
I think die and did it happened
Yes,
well, you know. I die, I did.
that's it. But no,
Yeah,
it's a nice piece.
but like there's it's one thing to because you can switch one letter for two words, and then you've got to find another two words where those two switched letters fit into.
Mm,
And yeah, I remember there was a version I made before that initially that wasn't as good, and I sort of spent like days playing around with it, and then eventually got it to what it is now.
so
The
did you
funny
find
thing
the
is,
language was the hardest thing then, getting the right sentence structure?
yeah, and
Yeah,
it's like sometimes you get really close, but the tense is all wrong, and you're like,
yeah,
it's almost there if we look past this, and
yeah.
even now that the one it is at the moment, it's barely holding on in terms of. It's like, would anyone really talk like that? Um, Funnily enough, though, a lot of Scottish folk are like, they're
Really?
like, it
Okay.
sounds absolutely fine if you keep leaving the letters out.
I'm not gonna.
It
Oh yeah,
sounds,
of course. Yes. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Never thought about that. Yeah, it does work like that. Um, I mean, again, just sort of taking things more broadly. You've mentioned obviously the more kind of artistic based work you do, but also you are an author, you are a copywriter, so you've obviously got this appreciation of language and efficiency and correctness and almost like the rhythm, the dance of language. And
sure.
that's obviously something that's quite important to your work. And I know that many other cartoonist illustrations, I'm thinking someone that I really admire, and apologies if I mispronounce his surname, but Musalan or Musalan, he does some beautiful works, but the language is such an important part of his comedy and his kind of the sort of tension that we feel with this. So it's clearly something that's an important part of your material, I guess.
Yeah, I love his work. I saw one of his greeting cards in a shop the other day. I was like, oh, seen a real one in the wild. Um, yeah, there's definitely that with that language. Um, and I do like I'm not good at a pun off the top of my head, but I do enjoy a pun here and there, and it's
Yeah,
sort of playing around with different ways to sort of approach it. I did a series for a long time. I still do occasionally, where I'll put a thing up on Instagram and sort of say, give me a one word topic and I'll draw it.
right.
And, you know, the more often than not, I'll take a word, say someone write in keyboard, and then
Mm,
and then try to sort of play around with the meaning of the word.
mm.
And so for keyboard, I draw like someone surfing a big key,
Okay,
um,
yeah,
and just subvert the original
yeah,
intent.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think as well with language, that there's something about the lack of arbitrariness. Every word's serving a purpose. There's nothing sort of superfluous. It doesn't have to be necessarily short or brief, but everything's got to be there for a reason. I think that's something that stands out in this piece. We move on then to the third
Okay.
work, or um, I guess it's a series of works, which is about Sisyphus and the endless attempts to roll this boulder up the mountain.
Yeah.
Um, and with this, you also spoke about it in almost in the sense of it being a bit of an exercise in how you take an original idea or original sort of frame, and
Mm.
then you modify it in one way into another frame, and then to another frame, and each one is a slight kind of almost like manipulation of the whether it's the context, whether it's zoomed in or panned out, or whether it's the gag is about. So
It's
was this again? Was this more of an exercise to demonstrate that sort of process?
Yeah, more or less. So it's that idea of finding, you've got like the supermarket or whatever I mentioned before. You've
Mm,
got sort of a joke that's there, and there's no shortage of jokes about Sisyphus. That's sort
yeah.
of like I've got a big book of New Yorker comics from
Mm,
over the decades. And there's a whole section on Sisyphus related cartoons. So it's old news, but like the thing was the exercise behind that was like, okay, say you draw a joke about Sisyphus pushing a boulder up a hill, and then the idea is to sort of like, well, okay, change the camera angle, make a shift, make a change.
Yeah.
So what if the boulder becomes the character,
Yeah.
or what if you shift the focus to the top of the mountain and sort of there's someone at the top of the mountain waiting for their boulder delivery,
Deliberate.
estimated time infinity, and then I think, and then getting more surreal with it, be like, okay, so it's a moving boulder, like what other sort of spherical objects are moving? And you're like, well, what about 10-pin bowling balls? So
Yeah.
putting some 10 pins like halfway up the mountain. And yeah, that I think that idea of taking elements of it, pushing it around, moving it, and trying to tell the story from different angles.
Yeah.
And as a result, finding a different joke or a different way to tell what is a very old joke.
That's right. And I do think, I mean, I love it as an exercise because I think it's that sort of vantage point. It's who's the main character at this point in time. It's
Yep.
changing the nature of what is the thing that you're pushing. I mean, I love the one where you've got uh the fella pushing the boulder inside the boulder. So it's kind of this almost like this nested sort of story
Yeah,
taking
I
place.
think that was towards the end of the exercise where I'm really scraping the barrel on things to do.
Abstraction time, absolutely.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
I think it's go ahead, sorry.
this all comes from, I think I don't want to jump ahead on, but a lot of it, this idea comes from the book I sent through to, it's 99
Well,
Ways
yeah,
to
I
Tell.
mean, let's touch on that because I thought this was the
Yeah.
most
Uh,
apparent kind of inspiration
yeah.
that you drew from that. So yeah, tell us about the book.
Well, it's this wonderful, it's a book based on another book called Exercises in Style, which tells sort of examples of different ways to tell the same story. And Matt Madden, I think it is. Yeah, he did a comic book version a few years ago now, where he tells a very simple story of just a man himself, really, drawing cartoons upstairs, walks downstairs, opens up the fridge, forgets why he came down and opened up the fridge, and that's the story.
Hmm.
And then tells it 99 different ways. And there's one perspective from inside the fridge. So the first 7 panels are blank, and then
Right.
it's him peering in at the camera. And it's beautifully done. And
Hmm.
it's really like, I think it's a great book to give any sort of young artist, I think, or
Hmm.
anyone really who's sort of trying to find different ways to sort of think about stuff and do things. It doesn't have to be just a cartooning thing. It's
No.
you can apply it to a lot of creative industries, I think. And just, yeah, very good at teaching you how to, I don't want to say think outside the box, but that kind of
But I
mentality.
think it kind of is. I mean, that notion that you just expressed there of taking the camera perspective into the fridge,
Yeah,
it's such a
yeah,
clever twist. And even if you never create anything in your life that involves some sort of fridge-based illustration, the ability to think or to wire up that creative thought process, to think about that, I think is such an important thing again for us in data viz. When we look at a single data set, there are endless ways of analyzing that and perspectives of that subject. And I think sometimes we get too caught up in finding the one, the best one, the single one. And
right.
it's an elusive thing. There's no point trying to pursue that. But what's better to focus on is pursuing your truth, your vantage point about this thing, and hopefully others will share that kind of that perspective. So I mean, it's a book that I've immediately added to my basket. I think it's such a fascinating way to think about this. And the Sisyphus series that you talk about there is a perfect demonstration of that. And while we're here, we should
Yeah.
mention you've got a brilliant Substack called Outlined, where you talk a bit more about the process behind some of these works. And there's an article there about your sort of thought process
Yeah.
through this
Yeah.
series, which is wonderful. Um,
I've put that. But there's also a similar one that revolves around the classic sort of desert island gag.
okay,
Like
yes, yeah, yeah,
Cast Iron at Desert Island is, another tried and tested cartoon trope. But yeah, and doing different versions of that.
yeah.
Quite
No, I
fun.
think it's a brilliant exercise. And another work that I've read a lot about, and it was actually the first work that I came across of yours and instantly loved it, which was the Desire Paths piece.
Yeah.
Now, for those who are unfamiliar with Desire Paths, you need to get familiar because this is a wonderful world. And I noticed that you mentioned there's a Substack of a guy dedicated to Desire Paths, which we need to check out.
Is it?
You
All
include it
right.
in your article, yeah. It's somebody who talks about them. I'm gonna dive straight into find this because I thought it was a brilliant
Yeah.
reference.
I'm just going to shut
It's a
this curtain.
newsletter by
Hold on
Daniel
a second. I'm just going to shut
Giacopelli.
this curtain because there's
Go for it,
like
mate.
10:30, the sun comes straight through the window and it's only for like 5
A few
seconds.
minutes. Well, as you do that, so that there's a Desire Paths newsletter, and yeah, so this is a newsletter by Daniel Giacopelli. I think that's
Sorry. Danny's sorry, I thought
a
yeah.
newsletter about the
Sorry.
lesson-filled lives of fascinating people and others.
I totally
Yeah,
forgot. He's got a new one now, which is
right.
really wonderful.
Okay.
But yeah, there was Desire Paths. And I thought you meant like a Substack about literal Desire
Sorry.
Paths. But
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
yeah,
But
Danny's one's great. You should definitely check that out.
yeah, and again, for people who are not familiar with the notion of a desire path, it's when you find some sort of landscape and there's a formal path, but then there's a sort of human path which kind of cuts corners, where people have
Yeah.
found a more efficient route to get from A to B. And you've got this
It's the
wonderful,
classic trodden path through a sort of
exactly right. And you've
and
got this,
everyone else sees a path. He goes, "Oh, I think I'll go down
I'll
that
go that way
way."
instead.
Yeah. And then occasionally the council sort of gives up and turns it into an actual path
And
rather
accepts
than
it. Yeah, accepts defeat. And yeah, this is the one that I first came across your work via. And
Oh, really?
yeah, and I should say as well that um, the people of Athens, they love a desire path. I've been there a few times before Christmas, and they love a desire path everywhere.
Really? I've
Um,
heard Buenos Aires as well.
all right, okay,
Yeah.
and
It's like almost a point of pride that
yes,
they've made a lot of their own paths.
and what we've got here again, sort of to describe the visual, is we've got a 12 panel piece, 3x4, where you've got a series of almost like time points in time as this original path then becomes a desired path as people find a shortcut to the sort of pedestrian crossway. And then there's an attempt to block that off with a bench. And then there's people move around the bench. Then there's a bin and people move around the bin, a hedge, etc., etc. And I absolutely love this piece. Now, again, we'll just focus perhaps originally on the how did this come about as a thing? What was the spark that made you think today I'll do a 12 panel piece about desire paths?
Uh, so you can't, I don't think you can talk about this without like there's clear influence, which is what's the name? Crumbs,
Oh
cartoonist.
yeah, A Short History of America.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize like I liked the idea of just, and I've done stuff like this before where it's the same thing, it slowly changes. But I'd never done something with that many panels. And it was only afterwards that I looked back and realized not only did I have the same number of panels, but I had the same 3x4
Right.
layout
Okay.
as
Yeah. Yeah.
this America one. So yeah, there's definitely definitely a homage to that. And yeah, I think then I'm not sure. Look, I'm not sure where it came from. It was just a sketch in a notebook for at
Right.
least
Right.
it's quite an involved drawing to actually do. So I think the more complicated drawings I do tend to spend a lot of time in sketch form purely because I just find anything else to do rather than draw them out. Anyway, so I finally got around to doing it, and it just wasn't that hard really because it's the same image 12 times. So yeah, and I think I'd always wanted to do something about desire puzzles. It's just a case of sort of where and how, and
Yeah.
again finding the joke in what is a pretty mundane thing.
But did you force the 12 panels as a constraint to try and find a way to get, or did you need the 12 panels? Did you think? 'Cause I guess it
Uh,
guess it could have been six, it could have been
I
20.
needed 12. I think
Yeah.
I tried to do it in 9,
Yeah.
and then I realized I could fit more of a joke in.
Yeah.
And the sort of the punchline of it is eventually the council does turn it into a proper path. And then the very last panel, you can see the beginnings of a new
They didn't
shortcut
quite get it right.
branching off that new path.
That's it.
which I really like.
Yeah.
So
But I mean, you're talking the process right up here about the fact that it's almost the first panel has to be right, and everything kind of spins off that. And once you've got that first one going, you kind of get your heart of it. And I think what's kind of interesting from a visual perspective here is there's a certain choice of making the angle of the vantage point that we occupy as a viewer, kind of like a 60-degree angle where the path is. And I wondered, is that a conscious choice to break away from the sort of verticality of how we would read the panels? So it kind of cuts across it rather than sort of follows the lines down or something.
I don't know. I think if you had a top-down sort of
Mm,
plan, um, it's you're looking at a map, whereas
yes,
if from an angle you're looking at a
a
real
scene.
sort of a scene, you
Yeah,
know. So it feels a bit clinical if it's a
yeah,
top down. Whereas if it's on the angle, then you go, oh, I can imagine people walking through here,
yeah,
and I can see sort of side details and you know
yeah.
that. The one thing I did do with that drawing was it's it's subtle. Maybe I'm the only person who notices, but there's a slight sort of paper texture
To the
to the
glass.
drawing, whereas
Yeah.
a lot of the other stuff I've done has just been flat
Right.
color,
Okay.
and I think that slight texture kind of helps it as well. Sort of gives it a bit more of a uh sort of not a real feeling, but sort of
A
a
depth to it, I
lived in.
guess. Yeah.
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 So I quite like looking at that one.
And I
Yeah.
think this is one where you do allow yourself a bit more sort of detail and flourishing. We've got the hedge detail, and
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
that you're very proud of the bin and the details in.
Have I said that before? Have I?
You've written about it. Yeah, absolutely. You were so proud about the bin,
I was just about to say it again. I'm like, I did a really good bin.
the best bin I've ever done.
You know, this is what artists think about. You know, it's what are your proudest career moments? Well, I did a really good bin once.
But it does feel like you've allowed yourself a bit more, almost like material to use. We've got different colors, we have got that sort of different detail, perhaps in contrast to some of the more sort of the stick figures.
Yeah, it's not that sort of flat
Yeah.
yeah, style.
But I also noticed in one of the original sketches for this that in the first frame you had people figures. Now that's obviously something that is noticeably missing and absent. So was that something that again you sort of looked at it critically thinking, I don't need this because people know that people will walk, and so
Yeah.
that's a bit
Well, that's
superfluous.
it's exactly what I was sort
Yeah,
of saying before when you realize you don't need text or
yeah,
you know. And I think in a very early version I had someone sort of saying, "Oh, look at the path," you know.
mm,
And it was, and I was sort of, well, I don't need that. It's obvious what's going on. And then later on, I was like, I don't really need people in there either.
mm,
And it works better with people without people
yeah,
because I think if you have people in there, it confuses it because people are going, well, what's that person doing? You know,
yeah.
are they fixing the path? Are they making a new path? Are they,
Are they the
you
council? Are they the
yeah.
people? Yeah.
Have you ever seen that? It's quite old. It's been around a while. It's that bit of graffiti on a sort of substation wall, and it's someone's washed the graffiti off, and then
Oh
someone's
yes.
come back and redrawn it over
Yeah.
the top, and it's a series of it, and they have this fight, you know,
Yeah.
back and forth. He's just by the end of it, he's just writing red, you know, on the side of the wall. And so there's a bit of that element to it where you're not seeing any of the people involved. You're just seeing their handiwork and what's
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
on.
The
Like, you know,
struggle.
the new path's getting made and a new obstacles being put in. And
Yeah.
you can tell that the whole piece is, you know, has taken sort of 6 months
Yeah.
from,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, the last thing I was wanting to ask about this as well was, and this is again maybe overthinking it from my perspective, but when you've got this sort of structure of a 3x4, is there almost a sense of wanting to have each row itself be a little mini story, and that sort of rhythm of three, then three, then three, as much as the 12 individually?
Not, I mean, not in this case,
Mm,
not really. There is certainly a consideration
mm,
when you're drawing anything like sort of that's especially funny
yeah,
or trying to find humor where you're very aware that things work left to right
yeah,
and top to bottom And if you end something, say top right, and then pick it up again, sort of just the next row down, you can't have, and you need those things to really connect. What you
Yeah,
need to do is move that bottom one up. You
got you.
sort of, you got to decide where to make your splits and do things.
Yeah.
I've done it's still a sketch, but I've done this sketch of, that thing of like you're trying to take a photo of a dog. The dog is looking really cute. You're like, oh yeah, you get your phone out and you line it all up, and just before you get that perfect picture, the dog sort of off it goes, but they know.
Yeah, yeah.
So I did that I've done that, and that's sort of several images in a grid format. And I realized I was drawing the dog on the right-hand side of the person. The person's on the left.
Mm,
And in the last frame, the person's like taking the photo, click, and the dog's sort of doing the thing.
mm.
With that setup, it means the click comes before the dog moving. So
Ah,
I ended up
yes.
going back through and flipping it all around. So the dog's on the left and the
Yeah.
person's on the right. So every time
That
dog's not
sequence.
moving, and then
Yeah.
the last panel, the dog moves, and then you read the click. So there's time in there. So yeah, that's in terms
That's
of
part of the thought process.
putting things in the right position for it to work,
Y-
the way people see it and read
Yeah.
it. Definitely a factor. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, the last piece, very quickly, and thank you again for your time so far, Chaz. It's been fascinating. But the last piece is work that you've titled "A Map of Every City," and this is again a departure from the kind of comic structure of figures and settings, but it's a bunch of words that describe the characteristics of typical cliche arrondissements of different cities, if you like.
Yeah.
We've got the only physical attributes are the notion of a city centre river kind of
Yep.
wiring through, and then we've got some bridges across these. But otherwise, it's just brief descriptions that, again, we can all relate to this. When I read this, I thought, yep, yep, I can recognize that. So I guess again, I guess the first question is, where did this come from as a thing to do? And I guess it's very much one that you've formed through observations of your own travels, I guess.
Yeah. I was just thinking as you're saying that, I drew that near 10 years ago now.
Right.
It's still a favorite. So I
Yeah.
love it. It came from, I just moved to London and from Australia. And uh, so I'd be chatting to friends. They're like, oh, where are you living? And I don't know, say, oh, Stoke Newington, it's kind of like Northcote. And then, sort of saying, oh, Fitzroy in Melbourne is kind of like Shoreditch, and sort of trying to just, especially for friends who are coming to visit, they were like, oh, where should we go? What should we do? And I'd always do these sort of, this area is equals this area,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and then started to think about that. It's like, well, you could actually, like, it's almost like these areas are the same in every city.
Yeah.
Every city's got the sort of, um, that area full of like sort of railway yards and the IKEA,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then every city's got the area that's like full of bars, full of bankers,
Yeah.
during the week, and then on the weekend is a ghost town.
That's right.
And so started drawing this map and putting each one roughly where it's sort of kind of geographically where it should be. The IKEA one way
Yeah.
out, out on the edge. And the other one on the edge was sort of the area where your friends move and have kids, and sort of you can never be bothered getting out there.
That's right. Yeah.
And anyway, so yeah, and I started from the center. I just started drawing, writing them in and building it out like a sort of a city would grow.
And
And I
just
had to
the numeric system then, was that based on the sequence of the ideas that you had
uh,
almost, or
no, the number system was purely an internet thing because I
right?
realized that if I put it online, people would want to comment on specific
Yeah.
areas.
This is
So
like X, Y, or
if
Z.
I had it numbered,
Yeah.
people would sort of comment and reply to their mates saying, "Oh, we're so number one or number two." Um, so yeah, that's the only reason for the numbering
But
system.
that's
Otherwise,
a
it's
really
not needed.
interesting point though. That's you thinking ahead of how it will exist in the real world and how it might become a utility for people. So that's kind of
Yeah, yeah.
fascinating. And were you ever tempted to do anything more illustrative for this, or would it always lend itself more to this more descriptive text, perhaps?
Um, I've seen someone in the past do a similar one where they've drawn it, and it looks pretty
Mm,
good.
mm,
Um, and they've done one for a European city as well, which is quite good. You know, the tourist area and all this sort of stuff. But
yeah,
uh, yeah, because I've drawn maps before with smaller things. So look, it's not beyond me. I could do it, but I sort of like the graphic, sort of just this big blob of
the
nothing
texture
but
of it looks nice.
text,
Yeah,
and sort of, you know, creating some from a distance. It does kind of look like a city,
it
especially with
exactly does that. In fact, I'm looking now at it in small resolution, and it does have that sort of texture of a city from
yeah.
above. Yeah,
I kind of like it just being a sort of a text-based thing, really. It
yeah,
could also be good without the lines separating all the areas, you know. So you'd be forced to sort of it'd just be a sea of letters, which could be quite nice.
yeah.
When I did the book, we ended up doing a billboard in London, and they put that map on the billboard, and then we left some extra sections
Oh, very
open,
good. Yeah.
and left mark in underneath in the billboard, so people could go up and um, add their own versions in, which is just a really fraught thing to do in the middle of
I was
London.
going to say that.
Like sneaking down there and doing my own, you know.
Yeah,
But yeah, it worked quite well. It was good. It was
I
fun.
like that.
I'll find a photo of it for you. You can
Yeah,
add it.
brilliant stuff. Wonderful stuff. Listen, Chaz, thank you ever so much for your generous time and sort of sharing the process and the thinking behind those works. I absolutely adore your work, and now I've got the new office set up here. I'm going to be adding a few pieces to the basket, so we'll get them on the walls. But I guess my last question is, what's coming next? What are you working on, or what have you got in your sketchbook that is sat there gathering dust that you now need to get
Yeah.
done?
Look, there's a fair few things. I wouldn't. I look. I think this year there's a lot of year ahead too. I think this year, like, I wouldn't mind doing something a bit more like a book or some, like, basically something that, a lot of what I'm doing now is just sort of online and writing stuff, and that's
Mm,
fine and stuff.
mm,
But I do miss the physicality of a book, and sort of
mm.
there was an idea of putting together sort of almost like a zine of sorts, and
Oh, cool. Yeah,
just something tangible.
yeah,
And I was flicking through, well, moving some books the other day. I was flicking through all these books that I've had, old magazines, and like found some stuff. I was like, oh, this is really good stuff, and being able to
yeah.
flick through things.
That's right.
Yeah, the plan is to get some of this stuff into a sort of, given that it's been like 10 years now, maybe it's time for a retrospective in form. So
That would
yeah, I
be
think that's the plan.
that would be class. Yeah, brilliant stuff. Well, thank you again, mate. Lovely to meet you, and
It's been an absolute pleasure. Been really fun.
thank you to everyone watching, listening, and see you again soon for another episode of Explore, Explain. Bye for now. To see more information about today's episode, including some links to key sites and resources mentioned, please visit my website at visualizingdata.com. Here you'll also be able to find details about my book, information about my public and private training courses, as well as over a decade of blog posts. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking, subscribing, and spreading the word. See you next time.